Mike Sullivan has parted ways with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and today we're going to tell you why Mike Sullivan needs to at least sit down over some Tennessee whiskey with Barry Trotz and talk about hockey in Nashville.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this episode the way we kick off all of our episodes. That is with a shout out to our Locked On Predators insiders and our everydayers who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey. We also want to pause for a minute because we have a very special shout out today. We want to shout out a happy birthday to Kinsley. Happy birthday. We here at Locked On Predators are celebrating you along with some hockey news, but mostly it's a little bit about you, Kinsley. So happy birthday to Kinsley from all of us at Locked On. I am Ann Kimmel. I am a writer and co-host with Penalty Box Radio and a big Kinsley fan, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. Fellow Kinsley fan, I am Emma Lingan, Nashville Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
So a lot to get to today, even beyond Kinsley's birthday, which is the big deal. But huge news dropped yesterday after we had dropped yesterday's podcast. And we've been sitting on this, and then we started talking about it. And then we're like, now we have to say the real things, because the coaching carousel just got a little bit more crowded, a little bit more interesting yesterday as Mike Sullivan and the Penguins opted to part ways yesterday morning. We here at Locked On have talked vaguely about Mike Sullivan and Nashville. Today, we're going to get less vague. We're going to have a very honest conversation about Mike Sullivan and coaching in Nashville. Before we dive into the hot topic of the day, do want to let you know this episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. All right, Emma, I learned about this news via Emma. She was the first one to reach out to me yesterday morning. It was an all caps text, friends, and it said, Mike Sullivan and Pittsburgh not together. Big breakup news, you all. Big breakup news. This was mutually agreed upon. So want to just throw that out there so there are no rumors. Mutually agreed upon that Sullivan and the Penguins were going to part ways. This has been a 10-year relationship between Sullivan and the Penguins, second longest tenured coach in the NHL behind John Cooper, which is a podcast for a whole nother day because these dudes are just not sticking like they used to. It's a very interesting dynamic. And again, that's something we may talk about this offseason because I think there's something there. Of course, Sullivan won back-to-back Stanley Cups in 2016 and 2017. Yeah, we know. We saw the whole thing. Been an interesting tenure since then. The last 3 seasons, I think, is something that we need to be honest about, and that's that the Penguins did not qualify for the postseason. And of course, he did all of this in these 10 years with Sidney Crosby, guy you may have heard of, Evgeny Malkin, and Chris Letang. So, Mike Sullivan and crew have had quite a run over the last decade. I think is interesting. So Emma, of course, my response to Emma via text was The Office's "It's happening. It's happening. Oh my God" GIF because I'm fluent in GIF, y'all. We all know, this is what we know. We know Mike Sullivan is a coach that is going to be in high demand in the NHL. Why, Emma? Why is this a coach that teams are likely not just to be fighting over, but outbidding to get on their bench?
Well, the 2 biggest reasons are the reasons that you just mentioned, and that's those 2 Stanley Cups. Yeah. There's the fact that he has worked with arguably the best player on the planet in Sidney Crosby, gotten the best out of him, also gotten the best out of younger players, veterans. Like, he is very well liked by his players.
Yes.
He's got a lot of experience coaching, not just in the NHL, but internationally. He coached at the Four Nations Face-Off, but he's done a lot of stuff with USA Hockey. He is extremely well connected around the league. And the fact that, like you said, he was the second longest tenured coach. I mean, to be in an NHL coaching role for 10 years in today's NHL is a massive accomplishment. Like, you don't just keep your job because there's no one else or, something like that. It's not like there's a shortage of people who would love to coach in the NHL. So I think he is going to be in very high demand. And we're going to get into this a little later, so I won't, hash it all out now. But what I will say, just spoiler alert to everyone listening, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, the Predators are probably not going to get Mike Sullivan. We'll get into it later.
The other thing that we'll get into later is the fact that, remember, the Nashville Predators actually have a head coach. There is not a coaching vacancy in Nashville when it comes to an NHL team or an NFL team. I mean, like, if we're just being honest, there's not a coaching opening here in Nashville currently. And I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind, because collectively, I feel like this fan base believes, and here's I think this, let me finish that thought, and then I'm going to jump to the next one. I think this fan base believes that Barry Trotz surely is not bringing Andrew Brunette back. And thought number two, Barry Trotz has done little, if anything, to quell that, because in case you were wondering, Emma and I and the Nashville Predators media still waiting to hear from Barry Trotz on the end of the season press conference. We're just sitting around here waiting. Again, don't want to read too much into that. Again, Barry Trotz said, hey, look, I'm going to go out and do some scouting myself before the draft. He could be out scouting. He could be in Turks and Caicos with the Stamkos family. I don't know. We don't know. But we do know that we have not heard from Barry Trotz. And the one thing we will want to hear from Barry Trotz whenever this occurs is, Andrew Brunette is my head coach, or Andrew Brunette is not going to be the head coach moving forward. And the very next sentence he would have to say then is, here is the new coach of the Nashville Predators, because you don't fire a coach without having some idea of who is going to be your next coach. And everybody wants Mike Sullivan. And I think that's something that we have to talk about. Everybody is going to want Mike Sullivan. And I think it's interesting because, yes, he won 2 Stanley Cups, but the last 3 years, his team did not qualify for the postseason with arguably the greatest hockey player on the planet. Pittsburgh is in a different place than they were 10 years ago. And Mike Sullivan has opted to explore other options for where Pittsburgh is. And I think that's part of the conversation that we need to have when we talk about Nashville and Mike Sullivan. So, Emma, where are the other, like, let's just review, where are the other openings that are actual openings in the NHL right now, head coach openings? Because Nashville, by the way, not one of them.
Nashville has a head coach, y'all. Andrew,
yes, we do.
The head coach of the Nashville Predators. We have not been told otherwise. So if we're looking at teams that actually have a vacancy behind the bench, you've got Boston, you've got now Pittsburgh, you've got the New York Rangers, you've got Vancouver, you've got Philadelphia, you've got Chicago, you've got Seattle. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I think that that's important to keep in mind, that very fact hurts Nashville in this situation. And it could very well be why Barry Trotz, maybe not the only reason why, but to your earlier point, Anne, about you're not going to fire someone without having a plan in place. Now, unless you're Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh, Kyle Dubas came out and said, we're not looking to hire anyone until July. And that's because they're looking at, our entire organization, like, we're going in a different direction now. And to your point about Sullivan and not qualifying for the playoffs. I mean, poor Sullivan and Kyle Dubas were handed a really crappy hand by the previous management in Pittsburgh. And so they just kind of had to try to make lemonade, and it just didn't work. So that's not really on them. Side note. But I think when you're looking at what Pittsburgh's doing, it's like, oh, this is like, we're going to see what direction we're going to go in as a franchise. Nashville, if you're trying to win right now, which presumably they are, that's something where it's like, okay, we're not just going to, hope and pray that we get it right this time, because Barry Trotz, Andrew Brunette was his guy. If he did decide to move on from him, which again, reminder, he has not. But if he did, he would have to nail this one. He would have to get it right on the money. Like, the amount of pressure is so high. And knowing that, yes, you have someone of Mike Sullivan's caliber on the market is great, but all those openings I just listed, there's so many. Some of them are original 6 teams, Boston, New York. Teams that, the allure of coaching for teams like that, very, very real in the NHL. And then beyond that, if that's something that doesn't interest him, well, maybe he goes to like a Philly who, hasn't been near the top of the standings of late, but they have a really talented young core. They are very close to contending. That could interest him as well. And so Nashville, I mean, looking around the league, it's like not looking great.
We have Hot Chicken and Dolly Parton. So there's that.
And we have
also, hello. We have Minka, but we also have a head coach. And so if Barry Trotz wants to have that conversation, it's going to be an interesting one. While there is great appeal for specifically Mike Sullivan at a place like, say, Boston, where he's been before, by the way, or New York, we're going to tell you what the conversation would need to be like between Barry Trotz and Mike Sullivan when it comes to an appeal to consider Nashville. We're going to tell you what that conversation should look like coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by our great friends at Game Time, the Stanley Cup playoffs. They are here, friends. And if you have never been to a live NHL playoff game, it really is unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it is all elevated from the regular season. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door for the postseason is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you could save up to 60%. Their all-in pricing shows the total cost upfront, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. The app even shows you panoramic seat views, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Emma, I do think it is of note, like I mentioned just in passing, that Boston has an opening, and Mike Sullivan, familiar with Boston. He was there eons and ages ago for a couple of seasons there, and Boston is in a unique place. They are Brad Marchandless, which I have to tell you, watching the playoff game last night, and he is in red, and I'm like, red is not your signature color. I can't even with that one. It's a little bit tough. It's a little tougher on me than Gus Nyquist in green, but that's, again, a podcast for another day. Things to remember about the coaching situation. Let's review. Andrew Brunette is the coach of the Nashville Predators, but with somebody like Mike Sullivan on the market now, I do feel like Barry Trotz has to say, maybe we should have a conversation, because things with Andrew Brunette, it's hard to know which is the real Andrew Brunette. Is the real Andrew Brunette the 18-game point streak Jack Adams finalist, or is the real Andrew Brunette the coach that struggled to lead a team that should have been better to nothing? They got a fat lot of nothing this season. In case you didn't watch, it was nothing, and it took 84 years to get there. And here's what we know about Barry Trotz. And Emma, we went through this. Barry Trotz has been in a similar situation because when he became the general manager, he had a head coach in John Hines, who, by the way, can't take our call right now because he's busy coaching in the playoffs. He had a coach in John Hines and parted ways with John Hines because Andrew Brunette was his guy. Does the fact that he has done this before make you think that Barry Trotz would or is going to talk to the coaching candidates available now, despite the fact that, let's review, there's a head coach in the Nashville area for hockey? We have a hockey coach.
Yep, still have a coach. Can't
Still
say that
coaching.
enough. Cannot remind you all enough, because a lot of you out there seem to think that it's already a foregone conclusion that Andrew Brunette is not coming back. And it's not, because
It's not.
now he is the coach. But again, I think when a coach of Mike Sullivan's caliber becomes available, that is not something that happens often. Because again, 10 years with one organization, that is almost unheard of in the NHL. When a coach of his caliber becomes available and you are even remotely considering a coaching change, it would be irresponsible not to at least check in. And I think you're gonna, if you're Barry Trotz, it's like, well, I should at least call him. Like you said, at least have the conversation. Because then, at the end of the day, maybe Mike Sullivan's already decided, like, I'm going to Boston. I'm from there. My kids live there. My grandkids are there, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or maybe I want to go to New York. Like, whatever it is, I think that doesn't matter. I think if you're Barry Trotz, it would be irresponsible not to at least be like, hey, Mike, how's it going? Check in. So I think that there's,
It's
but
a due
again,
diligence almost.
absolutely. And I think that it's just what you do. You check in. So that way, when people, if it comes to it, you can say like, hey, we checked in. He wasn't interested, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, for Mike Sullivan to come to Nashville, again, none of this happens in a vacuum. Remember all of the other coaching vacancies that are actually vacancies that I named earlier, and where some of these teams are in their, contending timeline. For Mike Sullivan to come to Nashville, I truly think it would take Barry Trotz and Bill Haslam or whoever coming to him with a blank check and saying, you tell us what you want. You say jump, we will say how high. Like, whatever you want, we will make it happen. And not just with the money. I mean, there might be other, contingencies too. I'm just saying, like, it would have to be, like, they would have to move heaven and earth to get him here. And quite frankly, if, again, for a team that already has a coach, that doesn't seem like something they're going to do.
Well, and here's the thing about Mike Sullivan, and this is a part of the conversation that came up yesterday. Mike Sullivan is in a position to name his price. He may reset the coaching market, because there is a team, there's probably more than one team, who is willing to go to him and say, we know that coaching is going to be like, that is the link that's missing to put this together in the next 2, 5, 7 years, and you're the guy that we think can do it, and here is a check, fill it in. Teams are going to do that. The question is Barry Trotz? Because remember, Barry Trotz already has a coach.
Have we mentioned that yet? I don't know that we've said that.
I don't want us to forget that we do have a coach in Nashville, and no matter how the Predators fan base feels about it, ultimately, there's like a 50-50 chance to me that Bruno could come back. Like
the longer we go here, the longer we go without hearing from Barry Trotz, the more that becomes like, yeah, no, he's coming back. It's less of a 50-50 and more of like a 80-20, like he's coming back. Because we don't have any, I'm not going to say we don't have any reason. I mean, lots of Preds fans have their reasons for not wanting him to come back. But I mean, we have no indication that that's something that Barry Trotz has even considered. Right or wrong, agree or disagree. That's just what's real. So
yeah. Here is why Mike Sullivan would be so tempting to me in Nashville. First of all, Sullivan knows how to coach a superstar. Now, when you think of Nashville Predators, you don't automatically go, oh, that's a team full of superstars, because it's just generally not thought of that way. But you've got a Steven Stamkos who signed here for a couple more seasons, and you brought in Stamkos and Marchessault and Shea with the promise of what, Emma? This is a team that's going to contend. We are going to compete. We are going to contend. Not with the promise of we're going to try to contend for a year, and then when it fizzles out, we're going to rebuild, and we're going to need you to mentor the young players. They didn't sign on for that. So you know that there are superstars that want to contend now. You are at the back nine of Josi, of Forsberg, of probably Saros. You're at the back nine of Sissons. Like, what are you going to do with them? Mike Sullivan, I feel like, would know what to do with them. Because if you look at Sidney Crosby, who is 857 years old, his numbers are still freaking amazing. It's annoying. His mustache is terrible, but his numbers are still great. And I'm not saying that Nashville has like a hidden Sidney Crosby here. I'm saying Mike Sullivan knows how to get the best out of a really talented player. And I think, sadly, Stamkos is the selling point, not Forsberg. I think Stamkos is the selling point. The question is, can he develop young players? Because if you're coming to Nashville, you have to do both. Because Nashville is a team made up of both. That's going to have to be made up of both. And I look back at, I don't know, see if you can bring a picture to mind when I say this name, Phil Tomasino. Do y'all remember Phil Tomasino? Yep. Phil Tomasino went to the Penguins earlier this season. Do you I honestly had to double check that Phil Tomasino was on the roster this season because it has been so long, you all. Tomasino played 50 games with Pittsburgh. And while they're tied his career high in goals that he had in his original 76 game season with the Nashville Predators. Now, he also played a lot with Evgeny Malkin, who would increase my goal scoring stats, if we're being honest. But part of that is Mike Sullivan a coach who is willing to take a risk on a young player and put them in a position for success? You remember we had to wait 75 games or so for Luke Evangelista to get a crack at the top six. So I think there is something there that is intriguing for me about Mike Sullivan. But it comes down to exactly what you said, Emma, and that is Nashville getting ready to go through what he has decided to part ways from Pittsburgh that Pittsburgh is going through? Is this a situation in Nashville that Mike Sullivan can look at and go, you know what? Short term, I like their odds. And long term, I can develop their odds. I don't know if Nashville's there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is too similar. Again, Nashville doesn't have a Sidney Crosby, but
They do not.
They, like I alluded to earlier, he was dealt Sullivan and Dubas were dealt a pretty crappy hand in Pittsburgh because it was, we re-signed Crosby, we're going to re-sign Malkin, re-sign Letang, one last ride, we're going to still try to contend with these guys. And that's all well and good, but then they didn't build a team around them. And that's the problem. So I think, again, that's not on Mike Sullivan. He doesn't handle those decisions. But I think that a lot of people, like Pittsburgh fans, didn't like how he handled. They're like, oh, he never plays the young players. He doesn't give them a chance, blah, 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 which I just find interesting because I think it's all relative. Because
can we show you that for real?
I was like, because I've seen that a lot from a lot of Pittsburgh fans, like, oh, he's terrible. He doesn't play the young players, blah, blah, blah. And then I see what they're talking about, and it's like,
you people have no idea.
You have no idea.
No
and so
idea.
I was like, all right, don't listen to what the Pittsburgh fans are saying necessarily in that regard and use that as your like sticking point as to why we shouldn't get Mike Sullivan in Nashville. Because when you have Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang on your team, you're not going to play the young players over them. That's just not how that works. You're not going to play them over them. But to your point, he was still playing those young players with them. And that is what we want. That's what we want in Nashville. And so that's what I think is, you know, the key difference there. But I think that looking at Nashville, it is too similar of a situation to what he's leaving in Pittsburgh. Now, we don't know why, you know, the talk was that he basically sat down with Dubas and said, here are my demands. And Dubas said, thanks, but no thanks. And that's where it kind of went apart. And we don't know what those demands were. So maybe if it was like, oh, I want to win right now or whatever, I think that Pittsburgh's not in a position where they can promise that. I mean, they just can't. Pittsburgh is Nashville from like the last couple of years because they have now just racked up the draft capital. They have so many draft picks over the next like 3 years. I forget how many picks they have in the first 3 rounds, but it's like Nashville of the last 2 years. And so it's clear where the focus is. Of course, like you're trying to win now. No one's going to say, yeah, we're just punting on this year. We're not actually trying to win. But like,
hilarious.
I mean, I think that it's too similar to where Nashville is right now because it's like you look at the roster again. Yes, on paper, this should be a roster that wins right now, but they just don't. I mean, you can't argue with the results. The results from year one were not good. They were really not good. So I do wonder, I wonder if Nashville is maybe too similar of a situation to what he's leaving in Pittsburgh. Because if he wants to, I mean, Pittsburgh admittedly was a mess with the roster construction. It was terrible. Yeah. Again, not his fault, but he's the one who had to deal with it. And is Nashville too similar to that? I don't know.
To kind of gauge what people were feeling about this Mike Sullivan opportunity. Coming up, we're going to share those poll results and a very interesting point made by somebody on YouTube that I think we need to talk about when it comes to Mike Sullivan. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets if that $5 bet wins. FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it is picking your favorite team or diving into those player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many different ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same game parlay for a chance to win big. So friends, do not miss out. Head on over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, Emma. So put a poll up on YouTube just to sort of gauge where we're at with this. And here were our options. What do you think Barry Trotz should do when it comes to coaching? By the way, he has a coach, but we didn't add that. So our options were hire Mike Sullivan no matter the cost, because it's going to cost. Retain Bruno on a short leash, pursue another more affordable head coach, or it is Carl Taylor time. Interesting results. 49% said hire Mike Sullivan no matter the cost. So again, can't make Mike Sullivan say yes, but a fan base wants Bruno to at least tempt him. Carl Taylor time, 25%. Retain Bruno on a short leash, 16%. Or pursue another more affordable head coaching option, 10%. Here is a comment on this poll that I think is something that we have to weigh out when we're talking about Mike Sullivan, Andrew Brunette, head coaching Nashville Predators. This is one of the commenters. Brunette is your coach for the short term and long term. Veteran players currently on the roster are a bridge until prospects are ready to take over. Should be a middle of the pack type team unless this team develops incredible chemistry. And here is the point that you have to look at when you're talking about the Nashville Predators, the future, and head coaching and roster construction. The Central is going to be hard to win with Dallas, Colorado, Minnesota, Winnipeg, St. Louis, and Utah established or quickly on the rise. The reality may very well be that Nashville is the 7th best team in the Central Division for the next 4 years, despite whoever the coach is, based on the established and young talent of these rosters. And you can go to Mike Sullivan or to any other coach that you are interested in and show them the Nashville Predators roster on paper, which we learned the hard way. That's fantasy hockey, as Barry Trotz says. And say, look at how good this roster is. If you come in and coach it, we're going to contend. Any smart coach is going to look at this Central Division and go, ooh, Dallas has got a great combination of veterans and young players right now. Colorado has superstars. You want to talk about Sidney Crosby? They've got a couple superstars. Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, Gabriel Landeskog is back. He has risen. He is back, you all. They've got some really good young talent. Minnesota, an interesting team. They've got a superstar on their team in Kaprizov. Don't really like him, but he is a superstar. Winnipeg, not really sure if they can replicate this, but they have shown you that really good players coming together, and Hellebuck in net, which I know he had an off night the other night, and we can talk about that. Something's happening there. St. Louis, I really don't know what's happening at St. Louis. I don't know if they can replicate it, but it's fun to watch. But the Central Division, you are not just going to bring in a head coach to any team in the Central Division and rock it to the top, because it is so competitive, and it will remain competitive for the next 3 seasons, at least. So I think Mike Sullivan, he's got to be honest about that. And look, I would love Mike Sullivan to come here. I think it'd be fascinating to see what he could do. But you've got to be realistic. Nashville spiel really comes down to hot chicken Dolly Parton and maybe, I don't know. Good climate. We got a great climate.
Yeah, no state tax.
No state tax, Mike Sullivan.
Yeah, it's the sales pitch, no matter how good it is, it's not going to be enough. Like, just realistically, Nashville is not a destination. I mean, it's a destination, but for a coach who has won multiple Stanley Cups, who wants to win more, this is not, like, Nashville's not a hockey town. I'm sorry. Like, I don't mean that disrespectfully. I'm just saying it's a town with a hockey team who was really, really good in 2017. And I'm sorry, but the rest of the league has moved on since then.
They don't know.
Nashville fans, like you and I were talking about this earlier, Ann.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, if you ask most NHL fans, unless, they were Pittsburgh fans, I think that most of them couldn't tell you who Pittsburgh played against in the 2017 Stanley Cup final. Who
Correct.
did they beat? You know,
And if they
Nashville
could say
fans,
Nashville, they would not be able to tell you who was on that roster.
yeah. And Nashville has been clinging to that, like that memory, that dream of, oh,
So
we'll
close.
run it back and we were so close. We're right there. Y'all, that was 8 years ago. Everyone else has moved on. And I'm sorry, that's harsh, but it's just what's
But that's
real.
the reality in the league. If you are looking at coaching jobs and you just line up Boston, New York, Chicago, Nashville, you are the coach that's getting ready to set the new standard for what a head coach in the NHL makes, Barry Trotz has to have a really good sales pitch. Or there has to be something here that Mike Sullivan really wants to do with this particular roster or this particular franchise. And maybe there is, but it's going to have to be something really unique, because set aside rosters entirely, you're going to want to win a Stanley Cup with the Rangers, with an original six Blackhawks and Connor Bedard, with the Boston Bruins, even though I don't really know what they're doing up there. It's a tough sell. Now, Barry Trotz, I feel like Barry Trotz could sell water to a drowning man if he really tried, because I do. I think he could. And I think Nashville has some things to offer. But if you are Mike Sullivan and you're saying that situation in Pittsburgh, it's just not for me, Barry Trotz is going to have to do a lot of spinning to get Mike Sullivan to go, Nashville. And I don't know. I love the idea. I would be lying if I said I did not love the idea of Mike Sullivan in Nashville. I love the idea. Love this. I just don't know that it's realistic. We're so sorry to poop on the parade, but let's just be real. Like, it's a tough sell. And just throwing it out there, Nashville has a head coach by the name of Andrew Brunette, who Barry Trotz selected.
I don't know if we mentioned that yet. So just, yeah, I think that's really important to say. Nashville has a head coach right now.
There is no head coach opening. There's no coaching opening currently in Nashville. Doesn't mean Barry Trotz might not be having some side conversations, but just so we're clear, if you're looking for a head coaching job, officially, Nashville's not on the list of places that you're going to be looking. What is Barry Trotz going to do about that? What is Barry Trotz going to do about who is the head coach behind the bench? We don't know. And we don't know because we're still waiting. But we'll hear from Barry Trotz at some point in time. And again, anytime we hear anything about coaching decisions or all of that, we're going to be talking about it here at Locked On Predators. We were really excited when the news dropped yesterday to come on and to talk about Mike Sullivan, this very recent and interesting development. So let us know what you think. Do you think Mike Sullivan is A, the right fit for the Nashville Predators? And B, do you think the Nashville Predators could put together a sales pitch that would make Mike Sullivan go, Let us know in the comments of this video, or you can find us on social media at LO_Predators. We would love to hear what you have to say about the coaching situation in Nashville moving forward. Emma, before we log off on this Tuesday, will you remind everybody where they can find you and where they can find your hockey work?
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingan, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
And you can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find my work with Penalty Box Radio as well. Friends, that is going to do it for this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thanks again so much for making us your first listen of the day. Kinsley, go out and have the best birthday ever. We will be back tomorrow with an all-new episode. We'll see you then.